My name's Lowell Snow. I'm the author of Prayer Guide, a manual for leading prayer. I just want to talk to you for a few minutes about what this book is and how you can use it. And I want to use a spiral bound to kind of take a look at it with you. The unique purpose of this book is to help you lead prayer more effectively. Whether that's saying a prayer in a public situation, whether it's at church or at a ball game, or leading a small group prayer meeting, or if you're a worship leader or pastor leading prayer in a worship service. What you're looking at here is the table of contents, and so let me just kind of do a quick overview of the book, and so you can kind of see the idea of how it can be used. There are 5 sections in the book. The first section is called Prayer Basics, and it is just that. It would be for a person who is new to the Christian life, or a person who just kind of wants to go back and remind themselves of the basics of prayer, and that's where the book starts. It's like a pilgrimage of prayer, and so it just begins with the basic, talking with God. Now, here's one of the things I think is unique about the book. After these foundations have been laid in Section 1, then Section 2 is a practical how-to section that takes the principles that are taught in Section 1, Part 1, and applies those principles to specific circumstances in which you might be called upon to lead or say prayer. For instance, Chapter 6 here is saying a prayer in public, sporting events, civic clubs, etc., and some principles about praying in those kinds of circumstances. The next chapter is saying an opening or closing prayer. Your pastor asks you to say the prayer at the end of a worship service or whatever. Saying a prayer during a worship service, such as an offertory or a benediction. These kinds of circumstances where people are asked to say prayers. There's also a chapter here on praying in times of tragedy, such as when you visit someone in a hospital room, or even a friend who has had some traumatic event in their life, and some suggestions about praying in those kinds of circumstances as well. And then the next section, Part 3, is the very heart of this book, and that is Prayer Guide Techniques. Now, the title of the book is Prayer Guide, a manual for leading prayer. And the concept here is that you learn to become a prayer guide. In whatever circumstance that you have opportunity to lead prayer, whether it's with your children or your family at home, or a Sunday school class, or an entire congregation, that you learn the skills of guiding a group into the presence of God for an authentic conversation with Him. And so these are some techniques that I developed as a pastor over the years that work, and they're simple and practical, and those principles are laid out here. Chapter 15 is actually a chapter on dealing with prayer requests. It's one of the most common questions I get asked from church leaders is how to do that. So there are 4 techniques here, and then a chapter on dealing with prayer requests. And then again, the next section, which is Part 4, is a practical how-to application, where it takes the principles here in Part 3 and applies them to specific circumstances. Here's a prayer walk, if you have opportunity to do that. A short prayer time with a small group. That would be the typical Sunday school class prayer time to lead. And then final part, Part 5, is guiding prayer and worship. And obviously this would be for those of you who are pastors or worship leaders. So let's take a look at some of these chapters and just kind of let you see how things are laid out. At the end of every chapter, there's a study guide. If you want to teach this book, there are questions, and each chapter ends with a discussion question. Here's chapter 6 on saying a prayer in public. This is the one, civic groups, that sort of thing. And so it just kind of begins with a Bible study of that applies to that kind of prayer opportunity. and then goes through that preparation, salutation, petition, and benediction. Each chapter does this same thing. It tells you how to make suggestions about preparing for that kind of prayer, and then actually going through the prayer, what you'll want to include in the prayer, and then even some sample prayers. Such as someone might say at a football game. The idea here is not to go to the football game and read this prayer, but this is just an illustration. And many people find that those illustrations are helpful in that process. Saying an opening and closing prayer. Probably the public prayer that laymen deal with most of the time. Opening prayer for a class or a committee meeting, or even in a worship service. And there again, a short Bible study, and then the preparation, salutation, petition, and benediction. Again, some samples and some suggestions. Here's the part 3 on prayer guide techniques. And as I said, this is, I believe, the heart of this book. And the reason you need this book, one of the greatest needs in the church today in regards to prayer, is that people don't know how to do group prayer. And therefore, in most churches, people don't come to prayer meetings because generally they see prayer meetings as being boring. Not because prayer is boring, God is certainly not boring, but because the way prayer meetings and group prayer has been done, in their experience, it is a boring situation in which they usually don't participate. They're just sort of there. But these techniques engage people in prayer in ways that they can do. Even people who never pray out loud can be involved in a prayer meeting if you just simply know some basic techniques. Now, and then after those techniques are presented, then there are the chapters that apply that to specific circumstances. Those techniques are used. For instance, here's an extended prayer meeting with a small group. This would be a situation where you were asked to, say, lead a prayer meeting in your home for 45 minutes to an hour, to lead maybe 15, 20 people to pray for some special event that's coming up in your church. Again, starts with a little study, background for that, and then preparations, things to do in preparation, and a checklist, literally, in preparation for that. Now I have an arrow here pointing out the fact that there are cross-references throughout this book. In other words, this is an instruction about something to do, and there's more clarification on how to do that in this chapter. And so there's a reference back to another chapter, and that's all through the book. It is a manual. It's not a book you just pick up and read from beginning to end, although I would suggest you do that when you first get it. But it's a book that you keep in your library, and then as different needs come up and opportunities for prayer leadership, you can pull it out, and that, as you saw, that table of contents is very detailed. You find the situation that you're going to be in, and you refresh your memory on how to go about doing that. Very practical, very how-to. You can do this. The final section, as I mentioned, is prayer in worship. For those of you who are involved in worship, this is for you. One of the greatest needs in the church today is more effective congregational prayer. Most people go to church and never talk to God. As inconceivable as that is, when you think about it, it is the reality in most churches. And one of the reasons is most pastors and worship leaders have really never been taught how to lead congregational prayer effectively. And that's what this whole section is about. And I believe it can transform many churches. Before I quit, let me just show you that in the back there are several helpful appendixes. Here is a quick guide to planning a God-centered worship service, and just some practical how-to for that. Prayer guide, a manual for leading prayer. I hope you'll give it serious consideration, and I believe it'll be a blessing to you.